This really happened to me, and I've never told it anywhere like this. I'm 24, and this is the story of how my husband siphoned our savings into his lover's account, how I froze everything, and how I vanished. A push notification lit up my cracked iPhone on the kitchen counter while 20 people laughed in our living room. Wire transfer confirmation, $40,500 to Savannah A. The scent of supermarket peonies mixed with the smell of warmed brie and cheap rosé, and I stared at the glowing blue numbers like they were police lights. My husband, Evan, raised a glass at the far end of the room, the brand new keys to our Sky House Austin apartment dangling from his belt loop, while a girl in white sneakers I didn't recognize leaned against our balcony railing and watched him with the slow smile of someone who already knew, the buzzing phone on the quartz countertop, the condensation ring from a Topo Chico bottle, the blinking microwave clock. These tiny noises and lights were the only things that didn't lie to me. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I palmed the phone, screen face down. In the reflection on the stainless fridge, my face was pale but very still, the way water looks right before it overflows a rim and spills. "You good?" my best friend Jules whispered, sliding beside me to refill a bowl of tortilla chips from H-E-B. Jules and I met freshman year at UT when we both lived in Jester East. She wore eyeliner like war paint and could make a spreadsheet sing. Now, she was in her second year at UT Law and had the kind of brain that didn't rattle easily. I nodded, though our savings account pulsed behind my eyes like a migraine aura. "Yep," I lied, and kissed her cheek, and took the chips into the living room where Evan's fraternity brothers from Beta were shouting over a fantasy football trade. If you'd asked me that morning what scared me most, I would have said the rent, or the way the elevator doors in our new building sometimes hesitated and then snapped shut like a mouth. Evan had gotten the apartment, 2 bedrooms, a narrow balcony that stared at the cranes over the domain, by promising me that our house fund made it safe to stretch. The house fund was the pot we'd grown since sophomore year, my weekend shifts at the Starbucks on 24th and Newsies, his internships, the wedding checks from family who half smiled like we were too young and would grow out of it. The number had become mythic to me, a symbol I touched in my head. 53,000, then 62, then we had crossed 70 when I got my promotion at the University Communications Office. We called it The Hill, as in, we're over the hill. We sent each other screenshots when interest hit. It was boring money, slow money, safe money, the kind that made everything make sense. "Toast!" Evan yelled, slapping his hand on the countertop so loud the room quieted. He had that gift. He'd been head of partnerships for a little fintech startup down at Capital Factory, all shiny hoodies and interior plant walls, all hands meetings with kombucha on tap. He could walk into a room and rearrange it around him without anyone noticing the furniture moved. "To our upgrade," he said, grin sharp, "to Sky House, to finally being out of that ratty place off Speedway, to my wife?" And he did a mischievous bow toward me, who said yes to this crazy life. There's a game you play when you're 24 and want to be believed. You make your face behave. So I smiled and lifted my glass and felt the wire transfer burn under my tongue like vodka. Later, after the last guest left with a leftover cupcake and the dishwasher clicked alive, Evan set his phone face up on the coffee table like a dare. "You were quiet," he said, slipping fingers into the back pocket of my jeans. The TV cast an aquarium glow. The city hummed under us. I thought of the notification, that number, Savannah A. "Just tired," I said, host's hangover. He kissed me, smell of whiskey and mint, and murmured about a demo day coming up, about options vesting, about being so close to making it. I pressed my palm to his sternum and felt the pulse there, steady and dumb. You trust me, right? He asked suddenly. His eyelids lowered in a way he knew I found beautiful. He had these eyes that could go light as topaz when he wanted something. I married you, I said, because that answer used to be a spell. What I didn't say, I had already airdropped myself the screenshot from my cracked phone to my laptop the moment I was alone in the bathroom. I sat on the closed toilet, skirt hiked up, unglamorously, thumb moving in a precise mechanical way I didn't recognize. It saved to a folder called Receipts. I remember the blue folder icon bouncing in the dock like it was the most cheerful, oblivious thing in the world. We didn't meet in a movie. We met freshman year in a sociology class called Power and Privilege at UT Austin, which I now consider cosmic trolling. He walked me to the drag for tacos, and I liked that he put his hand between my head and the car door even when it wasn't necessary. When we got married at the Travis County Courthouse across from Wooldridge Square, we were 22, and we thought that meant brave. It meant we were good at sharing quesadillas and bad at imagining the future as something other than a photo wall. I believed him when he said we were a team. The idea of Team Evan and Maya, my name is Maya, was a shiny banner I loved holding up. When the first hairline crack formed, I told myself it was a trick of the light. In July, a Venmo notification popped up that wasn't ours. His settings were sloppy, and our family iPad still synced to his account because we watched Netflix on it. The payment read pizza with 3 fire emojis sent to someone named Sav. I saw it by accident while the iPad sat on the counter, the case greasy from handling. The amount was small, $11, and I would have ignored it, except the note felt coded in a juvenile way, like the note was for the feeling, not the pizza. Sav could have been a coworker, a friend, a guy. It could have been anything. Later, a Lyft receipt in our shared email showed a 2 a.m. drop-off at a high-rise where none of his friends lived, and the red lipstick on the inside of his hoodie hood, so faint you'd call it wishful thinking unless you knew the exact shade of your own lipstick, and this wasn't it. But I wanted my life more than I wanted the truth, so I chose my life. I made spinach quesadillas and asked him about his day and made a playlist for our housewarming and bought a candle that smelled like sandalwood. And good decisions. The wire transfer didn't let me choose. The wire transfer was a word slammed into a sentence that didn't need it. The morning after the party, I woke up before Evan and felt the battery weight of my phone beside me like a live animal. I slipped to the living room and opened the curtains. Austin looked earnestly blue, cranes etching the sky, highways already droning. I logged into the bank app with fingers that felt like someone else's. There it was, savings, $19,407.56. The day before, we'd had nearly $70,000 I drilled into transactions. There it was again, wire, $4,500 to Savannah Alderson. I memorized the account number fragment. Evan had transferred almost $50,000 out in one move and left me the kind of remainder that felt like a joke. I took photos of the screen with my phone, then my laptop, belt, and suspenders. My stomach did a slow flip. Evan patted in, hair wrecked, wearing the gray UTT that looked best on him. "Hey," he said, voice light. "Coffee?" "Sure," I said, and forced my eyes not to snag on his phone on the counter. He poured, and the smell made me feel like a person again. I took one sip, then another, and listened to my heart return to the room. "We should talk about the savings," I said, as neutrally as if I were saying, "We're out of paper towels." His face did a funny little blip, surprise quickly masked with warmth. "Yeah, I wanted to, actually," he said. "I've been meaning to tell you, I moved some into a short-term play. Really smart. My buddy's fund is doing a high-yield bridge for a founder he knows. We'll have it back in like 10 days max with a kicker." He smiled wider when I didn't react. "Babe, it's money working. You're always talking about making it work." "You wired almost $50,000 to someone named Savannah," I said. The way his pupils contracted felt like a stage cue. "It's an LLC," he said smoothly. "It's named after the guy's Grandma Or his dog. I don't know, something Southern. You know how these Austin guys are. They love whimsy. I looked at him and remembered all the times I'd chosen to believe good things because they made me nicer. I want the name of the fund and the term sheet, I said. Jesus, Maya, he said, a fraction too loud. Do you not trust me? After everything, you think I'd jeopardize us? He laughed in a way that wanted witnesses, though there were none. Savannah? That's insane. You think I'm sending money to some girl? He pulled me into him like I was a skittish animal. You're my wife. There is gaslighting that feels like a fog machine, dissipating in the open air, and there is gaslighting that feels like pressing a pillow over your own face. I watched his mouth move. I smelled the coffee. I felt the place where his hand pressed at my back like he was preventing me from falling or from leaving. I couldn't tell. Okay, I said slowly. Then 10 days. He kissed my forehead. He put on his Allbirds. He left with a whistle. I stood barefoot in the kitchen and put my coffee on the counter and reached for my laptop like it was a weapon. I didn't have a plan yet, only an instinct that felt like a single line, drawn forward. Get proof. Jules texted me at 8:11 a.m. You looked like a statue last night. Alive? I sent her the screenshot. Jules called immediately. Didn't bother with hello. That's not a fund, she said. And if it is, it's the worst named one in America. Do you have the details of the wire? Account number? Routing? Partial, I said, reading off what the app gave me. I can make more phone calls when I'm out of class, she said. But step 0, stop the bleeding. Do you still have the separate checking you opened sophomore year for your Starbucks tips? Yeah, it's at a credit union, I said. I kept it because it made me feel like a person who existed before Evan. Cool, she said. Paycheck goes there now. Also, request statements from the last 6 months for every account with your name. And just document everything. Names, times, screenshots. You're not being crazy. You're building a timeline. I don't want to divorce him, I said, my voice small, because that felt like summoning a storm. Not the point right now, Jules said, voice going kind. Right now, we build a boat. That day, I discovered that stealing isn't always sneaking. Sometimes it's a clean wire executed during a party while your wife passes out napkins. I called the bank, the big one everyone banks with when they don't want to think about banking, and said I suspected unauthorized use by a co-owner. The woman on the phone had a soothing voice that made me want to cry. Ms. Patel, she said, using my last name like a rope tossed to me, I can put an immediate freeze on transfers from your savings and require dual authorization for any future wires. The word freeze fluttered in my chest like a flag. Do it, I said, please. I opened an account at my little credit union for my salary and shifted my direct deposit. I moved the modest emergency fund I'd kept in my own name, $3,200 that felt like a hidden jewel, into that separate account too. I ordered a new debit card. I ordered paper statements to a P.O. box on North Lamar that I'd gotten when we were between apartments, and then kept because I liked the idea of a secret address even when I had nothing to hide. At lunch, I walked to the Starbucks on 24th, where I used to pull shots, and ordered an iced coffee from a kid with a nose ring who called me ma'am. I sat in the corner where the AC rattled and wrote down everything I remembered that had felt wrong in the last 3 months. The Lyft receipt, the Venmo pizza, the weird insistence that I not log into the savings because the app security is quirky and you don't want to get locked out, like he was doing me a favor. The way a girl in white sneakers had watched him from the balcony the night before, like he belonged to a story she already knew the ending to. When 5 p.m. came, Evan texted, "Running late. Big push for demo day. Don't wait up." He sent a selfie from an elevator with a glass wall, his smile bright, the kind of photo you send a wife to say, "See? Work?" Behind him, I could see the reflection of a woman's ponytail and a white sneaker. Jules came over with Thai food and a six-pack and a plastic file box she called the vault. "I brought dividers and tabs," she said, slapping it on the table like a badge. "Also, I did a thing." She had called around. Her uncle, who did white-collar defense in Houston, a friend's mom who handled divorce in Travis County, a clerk at the Civil and Family Courts facility on Guadalupe she'd befriended while doing research. "Here's what's true in this county," she said, clicking her pen like a metronome. "There's a standing order that kicks in as soon as a divorce is filed and the other party is served that forbids either party from transferring, hiding, or destroying property outside the usual course of business. If he moved 50 grand as a gift to his girlfriend, that's dissipating marital assets. You can file ex parte for a temporary restraining order to freeze accounts and preserve the estate, especially if you can show he's already moved funds. Judges hate dissipation. They like paper." "I'm 24, I said, overwhelmed by the adultness of the words. "Judges don't care," she said. "They look at evidence. Also, Texas is a one-party consent state for recording. Don't break into anything. Don't log into accounts you're not authorized for. Don't impersonate him. But if he calls you and confesses on the phone and you're recording, that's admissible." I breathed in, breathed out, felt my pulse settle into a rhythm, gather, freeze, file, vanish. "What about Savannah?" I asked, tasting the name. "Who is she?" "Hold on," Jules said, fingers flying on her MacBook. "Let's see what LinkedIn and Instagram give us for free. He works at Ledge, right? That stupid name." "Dovetail Metrics," I corrected. "They rebranded from Ledge." "Whatever," Jules said, typing Dovetail Austin Savannah and then whistling. "There she is, Savannah Alderson, Marketing Associate, UT Class of 2024. Jesus, she's a baby." Jules clicked into photos. "Ooh, white sneakers, our balcony friend from last night." My jaw hurt. I realized I was clenching it. "Subordinate?" I asked, because HR loves that word. "Yes," Jules said, mouth curving. "HR loves that word almost as much as they love hostile work environment and misuse of company resources. Look!" She clicked on a tagged photo. Savannah clinking a glass with a caption about Team Dinner FT, the best boss in Austin. Evan in the background, laughing with his mouth open in the generous way he did when he wanted to be told he was generous. "Don't nuke her life," I said quietly, surprising myself. "She's wrong and it's cruel, and I hate her name in my mouth, but she's 22, and he's Evan." Jules nodded. "I hear you," she said. "But if he used company money for dates, or pressured her, or whatever, that's not your burden to carry. That's the truth's burden. Also, I'm not filing the HR complaint. An anonymous Gmail can do that just fine." I spent the next week playing the cleanest, most devious game of my life. I didn't snoop past the permissions I had. I was careful, like a safecracker. The iPad in our living room still had messages toggled on. Evan had never logged out because he liked answering texts from the couch. I didn't scroll old messages. I didn't need to. The notifications that came in while he showered were enough. A text from Savannah. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Your hands on the wheel and me." I turned off the screen and learned what it felt like to choose patience over explosion. I changed my direct deposit and filled the vault with statements. I placed freezes on my credit with Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion in case Evan tried to open anything joint. I called my car insurance and removed him as a driver. I changed my Apple ID password and took back the iPad. I told him I wanted to watch shows in the bedroom. "It's fine," he said, eyes on his phone, thumbs moving in the familiar whisper that had become a sound warning in my skull. On Thursday, I took 2 hours off work and went to the Travis County Civil and Family Courts facility, the building with long hallways and buzzing fluorescent lights where everyone's life was being negotiated in whispers. I met with a legal aid attorney named Maritza, who had this grounded, "don't you worry" tone. I slid her the folder with the screenshot, the statements, the texts I'd forwarded to myself without reading them, my handwritten timeline with dates and times, and the words wire transfer underlined so hard the pen had torn the paper. "You did good," she said, flipping through with a practiced eye. "We can file an original petition for divorce and an ex parte motion for temporary restraining order to preserve the marital estate. The standing order will kick in as soon as he's served, but we won't wait for that. We'll ask for an immediate freeze. You good with that?" "Yes," I said, surprised by how steady my voice came out. "And I need to be gone before he's served. For me." "We can schedule the process server for Monday morning," she said. "You can move this weekend." "Is that legal?" I blurted, heat pooling in my face. "Perfectly," she said. "You're not kidnapping a kid. You're leaving an apartment. You don't have to tell him where you're going. We'll list a P.O. box for your address, and if we need to do in-person hearings, we'll coordinate. You're not obligated to keep living with someone who is dismantling your financial life in secret." When I left the courthouse, the sun inched toward golden, and for the first time in days, I noticed the air tasting vaguely like teriyaki from the food truck row a block away. I bought a Topo Chico and drank it on the steps like I was rehydrating a version of myself I wanted to be faithful to. On my way home, I stopped at the UPS store on North Lamar and bought a new notebook with a black cover, the kind detectives use in movies. I wrote in bold letters on the first page, "Boat." That night, Evan was sweet in a way that made my skin itch. He brought home macarons from a place on South Congress and asked about my day like he could fold himself into my life on command. "We should go somewhere this weekend," he said. "Fredericksburg? Hill country? Clear our heads before demo day eats me alive?" "I promised my mom I'd help her with something Saturday," I said. "My mom lives in Round Rock." This was plausible. He made a face like he wanted to argue, then a shrug that meant he'd given the performance he needed to give. There was one more piece I needed before I steamrolled my life. I needed confirmation that he'd sent our money to an actual woman with a beating heart, not just a name on a screen with a star next to it. I didn't need text describing body parts. I didn't want to hold words I couldn't scrub from my brain. I needed a single clean proof. It arrived like I'd ordered it. On Friday afternoon, a hotel folio slid into our shared email, a general inbox he used for receipts. "Weston Austin at the Domain, thank you for your stay." It was from 2 weeks earlier, a Tuesday. He said he'd stayed late for a strategy offsite. The charges included valet one night and room service, champagne for two. He had not been celebrating alone. The "delivered to" line listed a last name, Alderson. I printed it. I printed 5 copies. Jules met me at my apartment Saturday morning with a U-Haul van that looked cheerful and dumb in the loading zone compared to the crisis we were staging. "We have 9 hours," she said. "You packed boxes?" We packed like a heist crew. In my version of vanished, I wasn't a ghost. I was a person whose absence created a solved equation. I took my clothes, my shoes, my grandmother's brass bangle, my books, my plant with curly leaves that liked morning sun. I took the KitchenAid mixer my aunt gifted us, but left Evan his smoker and his whiskey decanter and the framed poster of that movie he loved too much. I took my files and my laptop and the vault. I left the couch and the bed and the big TV because I had no interest in sleeping on symbols. We moved it to a 1-bedroom sublet in Hyde Park, owned by a professor on sabbatical who didn't ask questions and loved cats. The rent would stretch me, but stretch is better than choke. I set up a P.O. box as my mailing address on my bank accounts. I halfway expected Evan to appear in the doorway like a movie villain, but he was at the gym and then at work, and if he noticed anything amiss when he came home, it would be the faint blankness of a shelf or the way the apartment echoed when you clapped your hands. Sunday night, I sat at the tiny kitchen table in my sublet with a pen and a clean stack of cream envelopes I'd bought because I wanted the visuals to be as calm as my fury. I addressed one to Dovetail Metrics HR, one to the CFO, one to the CEO whose TEDx talk about integrity in fintech had made my eyes roll in a way that felt like a prayer. Inside each, I slid a copy of the hotel folio, redacted to show only the parts that mattered, a photo of the wire transfer, a short, neutral letter with bullet points stating that head of partnerships Evan Patel had used company time and possibly resources to conduct a relationship with a subordinate, had potentially misused corporate funds. That champagne receipt was charged to his expense card, the red stamp said it, and had engaged in conduct that created liability for the company. I didn't editorialize. I wrote like Jules taught me to write for a judge's eye. I also addressed an envelope to Savannah Alderson. I didn't include the folio or the screenshots. I wrote, I know about the wire and the Westin. I don't want to ruin you, but I will preserve my life. This is me letting you know there will be consequences, legal and professional, for accepting marital funds disguised as gifts. Consider this your notice. I slipped in a crisp photocopy of the TRO filing date and the case number. It was theater, but it was also truth. Jules said we weren't threatening her. We were giving her a chance to step away from a grenade and maybe finally smell the smoke. Monday morning at 9:12 a.m., the process server, Monica, texted me a photo of Evan being served in the glass lobby of his co-working space. He looked handsome and furious. He texted me 2 minutes later, "What the actual hell is this? You filed? Are you kidding me?" I didn't reply. My phone buzzed like a hornet's nest. I put it face down. Jules called and said, "Congratulations, your boat is in the water." What I didn't expect was the speed with which Dovetail moved when HR smelled the words subordinate and expense misuse. Within 24 hours, Evan was on administrative leave pending investigation. He called me, voice low and dangerous. "You went to my job?" "I went to the facts," I said. "Your job came along for the ride." "You are unstable," he hissed. "You're embarrassing yourself. I moved money to a fund. I can prove it." "Then do," I said softly. "In writing? With signatures?" He switched tactics. "Let's be adults," he said, voice going silky. "Let's meet for dinner." "Peach tortilla? We can talk about all of this without lawyers. You don't want to nuke us. We're us." We met. I wore a black dress like armor. He ordered cocktails and tried to touch my knee. "You love this place," he said, like maybe he could conjure the past and make it sit in the booth with us. "We had our anniversary here." "I love how I felt here," I corrected. "That's different." He inhaled like he was counting to 10. "Okay," he said, leaning in. "You want the truth?" "The money's in a safe place. We're being smart with it, Sav." He stopped himself, then plunged on. "Sav kept it because my name would raise flags. You know how banks are. Optics. We'll put it back when the demo closes and the options hit. You'll thank me." "There it is," I said, almost tender. "You said her name." He blinked and then smiled like a man who knew exactly which camera to look at. "You're going to feel so stupid when this pays off." I took a deep breath and pressed the voice memo off on my phone under the table. "One-party consent," Jules had whispered. The chair next to me held a tote bag with a notebook and an envelope. "I'm not angry like you hope," I said. "I'm not going to scream and make a scene so you can point at me and say, 'See, crazy ex-wife?' I'm going to do exactly what I said I'd do. Protect the estate, freeze anything with my name, and let a judge look at preservation of assets and waste. And tonight, I'm also going to do something you'll hate purely for how quiet it is." He steepled his hands, smirked. "What's that?" "Walk away," I said, "before your birthday party on Friday." He laughed, big and fake. "You wouldn't miss it." "Rules and regs rooftop? You planned that." "Exactly," I said. "I like a plan." On Wednesday, HR officially asked Evan to surrender his corporate card and laptop for routine review. His text to me was a flurry of blame. "You're costing me my job." "We don't even have kids. Why are you being a martyr? You'll never find someone who understands you like I do. You'd think the sentences couldn't inhabit the same throat, but manipulation is a marvelous contortionist. Thursday, Jules and I met with Maritza again. She filed our motion for a freeze with the documents we had, the wire, the folio, the recorded dinner slip where Evan said Sav kept it. Maritza was thrilled. "Thank you for talking like an idiot on tape," she said to the air like a toast. She told me that if Savannah had accepted funds in bad faith, knowing they were marital funds, there were remedies. Words like constructive trust and voidable transfer filled the room. I held on to the simple ones. We will get as much as we can, and you are safe. Friday morning, I woke up in my Hyde Park sublet with oak shadows on the wall and a calm I didn't recognize because it belonged to a woman I was just meeting. I made coffee. I ironed a white shirt I loved. I put my hair in a low knot, the way my mother did when she wanted to look like she'd never sweated in her life. I put the manila envelopes into a tote bag, one labeled HR, one labeled CFO, one labeled CEO, one labeled DJ. Jules raised an eyebrow when she saw that last one. DJ? Brady, I said. He's running the screen for Evan's birthday slideshow. I hired him. He takes direction. Rules and Regs is the rooftop bar at the Fairmont Austin, a place people book when they want to pretend they have a penthouse self. The pool glowed an engineered blue. You could see the Capitol dome if you stood at the right angle. Evan's Dirty 30 was there because Evan liked to press his joy against glass and make it look expensive. I arrived early and found Brady, a guy with a baseball cap and an organized Pelican case. "I've got the slideshow your husband's friend sent," he said, the word husband landing like a dull knife. I cued it to go on during the toast. "I have an updated version," I said, smile polite, voice casual. I slid him a USB drive labeled Evan Final. Inside were mostly photos because I wasn't a monster. College, wedding, friends on the lake. But then 3 slides in the middle, simply designed with black text on white background, a screenshot of the wire transfer, routing numbers blurred, the Weston folio with champagne for 2, crisp and legible, and a final slide that read, "Savannah, I hope you like pizza." Under it, in small print, the case number and the name of the judge assigned to our TRO. Nothing defamatory, no nudity, just receipts. I included, in very tiny font at the bottom, the sentence, "All information shown is available in public filings or accounts owned by the presenter." Jules had reviewed it and clucked in delight. "Ballsy," Brady said, whistling without looking judgmental. "You sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "And if Evan tries to stop it, play it anyway." "You got it," he said, slotting the USB without ceremony. People started to arrive, shiny and bright. The white sneaker girl showed, hair in a high ponytail, lips glossed. She wore a silk tank top that looked like she'd never sweat in it. She hovered near Evan's inner circle but didn't touch him. Smart. Evan hugged donors, backslapped fraternity brothers, kissed a few cheeks, and avoided mine with the practiced care of someone who wanted to control the camera angles. When he finally approached, he did it like a man walking onto a stage, hands out, palms up. "You came," he said, like this was proof of something. "I said I like a plan," I said. He leaned in to say something, but someone tapped a glass, a sound old-fashioned and charming, even when used as a weapon. His best friend Gabe climbed onto a bar stool, grinning, and announced, "Toast time!" The crowd clumped around the pool, faces upturned, people who loved a performance. Brady nodded at me once from the AV table like he was a priest, and I a penitent. Gabe spoke about Evan's drive and his hustle, about how he'd bagged a wife way out of his league. Laughter, and how he could pivot on a dime. More laughter. "Here's to the next decade," he said, raising his glass, "and here's a little stroll down memory lane." The screen behind him flickered. There was Evan at 20, Evan on the lake in a straw hat, Evan in a tux, and me in white. our faces embarrassingly open, people awed. I watched Evan watch himself, which he loved to do, and then the screen went white with black text. Wire transfer, $47,500 to Savannah Alderson. The photo of the bank screen was crisp. Phones went up reflexively the way they do when something happens, and everyone wants to make sure they didn't imagine it. There was a collective intake of breath, the sound a room makes when it suddenly recognizes itself. The next slide clicked. Weston Austin Domain, champagne for two, delivered to Alderson. Someone snorted like a cough. Someone else said, "Oh, damn." The last slide, Savannah, I hope you like pizza, with the tiny case number like a watermark of reality. Evan's face went a color that wasn't a color. He took a step toward the DJ like he could physically unplug the truth. Brady, bless him, clicked back to a picture of Evan at Barton Springs holding a dog that wasn't ours. The transition so smooth, it looked like part of the plan. The crowd did that shuffle people do when they're deciding whether to pretend something didn't happen or to acknowledge they're awake. Savannah, white sneakers, had gone very still. Her face was blank in the way a deer's is before it bolts. Evan tried to recover. "Well," he said, fake chuckle. "Not sure how that got in there. Someone's having fun with Photoshop." I lifted my glass like I wasn't shaking, and my voice didn't waver. "It's not Photoshop," I said to the group, to Gabe, to the sky. "It's just the truth." I touched the wedding band on my finger, then slipped it off and set it on the rim of an empty rocks glass. It made a small, polite noise. "Happy birthday, Evan." I didn't wait for the room to pick a side. I nodded to Brady. "Thanks." I nodded to Jules, who had materialized at my elbow like a ghost wearing lipstick. And I walked to the elevator. My tote bag felt light. In the reflection of the elevator doors, my face looked alive in a way that made my heart flip. The doors slid shut on the rooftop, on the pool, on the expensive joy. When they opened at the lobby, the Fairmont smelled like citrus and fresh linen. I breathed deep and texted Maritza. Played the slides, HR envelopes delivered, process moving. She sent a thumbs up and a line of party hat emojis that made me laugh so hard I shocked myself. At 11:48 p.m., hours after I'd gone home, Evan texted a single sentence. "You think you win by running? There isn't a finish line." It read like something from a movie about men who don't go to therapy. I blocked his number and turned my phone off and slept like someone who had found a murder weapon she didn't need to wield. The next week was a series of formalities that felt like kindnesses to myself. HR called me from a blocked number to ask if I'd be willing to cooperate with an internal review. And I gave them the folio and the text of the recorded dinner conversation. I didn't embellish. I didn't ask about Savannah. It wasn't my job to shepherd her out of a fire. A friend who worked at Dovetail told Jules that Evan had been terminated for a cause and that the phrase code of conduct had been spoken in the conference room in a way that made people sit up straighter in their chairs. Maritza called to say a judge had signed the TRO freezing the savings and any accounts where marital funds had been parked, including accounts held in constructive trust by third parties. It was a mouthful, but the meaning was clean. Savannah couldn't spend what Evan had sent her. The money sat in a legal freezer, with a label on it like meat you didn't remember buying. I imagined it, frostbitten and silent, and it soothed something in me. Evan's lawyer, a man whose email signature had 4 phone numbers, demanded a meeting. Maritza handled it. When I asked what had happened, she said, "He's mad," and suddenly very respectful of the word judge. I laughed, and then I cried, and then I laughed again because crying felt like an old habit, and laughter felt like a new toy. People like to talk about revenge like it's fire. They want you to set things ablaze, and then stand in front of the flames and warm your hands. They don't talk enough about the revenge that tastes like room. Temperature water, because it's pure, and necessary. I didn't want Evan destroyed. I wanted him irrelevant to me. I wanted my money unstolen. I wanted my 20s back from a story I had entered with my eyes full of someone else's future. Jules and I celebrated with breakfast tacos at Veracruz All Natural, sitting on a picnic bench under a tree that shed little helicopters. "You know what I love?" she said with her mouth full. "You never became the worst version of yourself even when it would have been useful." "I kind of wanted to," I admitted. "Of course you did," she said, "but you chose evidence. You chose leaving over screaming. That is boring revenge, the best kind." "Do you think she knew?" I asked. The she didn't need a name. It floated between us. White sneakers, new grad, glossy lip. "Honestly," Jules said, "he's good, but she's a grown-up. You don't drink champagne on a Tuesday at a hotel with a man who wears a ring and not know something. People know. They just choose the story that says they're special." "Maybe one day she'll choose herself," I said. "Maybe this helps," Jules said, not unkindly. Evan filed responses to our petition that were blustery and sounded like a man describing a mirror he didn't like. He offered to replenish the savings as soon as possible, which made me think of those signs on my work's bathroom that say, "We'll be right back." The judge assigned a mediation date. Maritza's face did that pleased cat smile I'd come to trust. "We'll get a fair split," she said. "You'll be okay." Meanwhile, I disappeared in the ways that mattered. I sent a notice to our landlord, invoking the clause in our lease about domestic separation. No special miracle clause, just a standard provision that allowed a co-tenant to remove their name upon a court filing and mutual agreement. Evan, keen to prove he could be reasonable, signed. I returned my key fob and kept a photo of it on my phone, a small, satisfying totem of an identity I had dropped. I told the communications office at UT I was moving on and took a contract gig writing copy for a firm in Chicago, remote for now, in person later when I felt like my bones had settled. I shipped 2 boxes to a friend in Logan Square. I forwarded my mail to my P.O. box. I switched my number to a new SIM and gave it to 3 people: my mother, Jules, and Maritza. On my last afternoon in Austin, I drove to Mount Bonnell and climbed the steps at an unhurried pace, the kind of walk you take when you aren't trying to outrun anything anymore. The river below was that specific Texas green that always looks like it's keeping a secret. I sat on the limestone and thought about being 19 in a class called Power and Privilege, and how everyone laughed when the professor held up a mirror and said, "We are both." I thought about a quartz countertop and a push notification and a girl in white sneakers and how 20 people laughed while my savings left the room. I thought about folding a ring on the rim of a glass and the polite sound it made. I thought about how I had believed if I was good and kind, I would be safe, and how the world had corrected me, not with cruelty, but with clarity. You keep yourself safe. When I got back to my sublet, there was a small box on the doorstep with Jules's handwriting on the label. Inside was a key, the tiny flat kind banks give you for safe deposit boxes. Attached to it was a note for the boring treasure. She'd reserved me a box at the credit union on Burnett. I put the key on my chain next to my grandmother's bangle and laughed again. That new sound? The mediation went like a scene from a play I didn't need to star in. Evan's lawyer blustered, and Maritza slid paper across a polished table, and at the end of it, the money in the legal freezer returned to the savings account it had vacated. We carved life into pieces. What fit me, what fit him, what could be sold, what we'd let go. We signed. It wasn't triumph, it was equilibrium. On my last night in Austin, Jules and I sat on my floor and ate pints of Amy's ice cream with spoons. "You did it," she said. "You're not on fire." "I am so boring," I said, and meant it like a vow. "You're boring and you're free," she said, and clinked her spoon against mine. When I finally left, I didn't leave a note. The old me would have written a letter, would have tried to be gracious, would have tidied the edges of a story so the person who broke it could keep holding it. I left nothing. If Evan wanted to find me, he could find my lawyer, and that was the privilege I paid for by not becoming feral. I drove I-35 north at dawn with my trunk full of books and clothes and a plant that liked morning sun. At a Buc-ee's outside Temple, I pulled over to pee and buy beaver nuggets and felt the ordinary joy of being a person in a gas station whose life belonged to her. My phone stayed blessedly quiet because I had made it so. I took the safe deposit key from my pocket and held it up to the light. It flashed small and sharp. Promise, I thought. Not the kind you make to a man in a courthouse with a bouquet in your hand, but the kind you make to yourself at a picnic table with tacos, or on a courthouse bench with a folder of receipts. I will be loyal to me. In Chicago, Logan Square smelled like fried dough and wet leaves. I rented a room above a bodega and learned the corners of a new life. On Sundays, I walked the 606 with a coffee in a paper cup and let my mind wander without bumping into a past I needed to dodge. When the divorce decree arrived, a sheaf of papers whose language was dry and exact, it didn't feel like a death certificate. It felt like a map and a clean border. I put it in the vault in the back of my closet and taped a small label to the front of the box that read, "Boring Treasure." Sometimes at the kitchen counter while my laptop warmed my thighs and the L shivered by the window, I'd think of that night at Rules and Regs and the slide with black text on white and how the room had inhaled as one animal. I would think about how satisfying it had been to choose a reveal that wasn't bloody, to use the sin's own paperwork as the blade. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell the story to everyone I met. I learned that silence is not the same as secrecy. Sometimes silence is just choosing not to narrate every rescue. Months later, an email pinged into my P.O. Box's digital dashboard from an unfamiliar address, SA. It was 3 lines. I didn't do the math. I believed the math, he told me. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it to Jules. I didn't hold it like jewelry. Oh, I let it vanish like smoke. If you asked me now how I feel about Evan, I'd say I don't. Not in a cold way, but in the way you don't feel about the shirt you wore at 19 that said someone else's college. He exists. He is a man who sits somewhere with a story in his mouth that makes him feel righteous. He will tell it, and people will nod, and it will feed him for a while. My story feeds me better. I didn't blast the internet. I didn't smash anything. I froze the accounts I could, filed papers that became tools, and removed myself from a room where my money could be moved without my permission. I used the rules the world made for when people like Evan forget that promises aren't loopholes. I used a slideshow to show a room what happens when a man believes the details living in his pocket won't ever turn into a chorus. When the first snow fell in Chicago, I made soup, like my mother does, and let the apartment smell like cumin and onion and steadiness. I put the safe deposit key in a little dish by the door and looked at it whenever I wanted to remember that prevention is delicious in its own way. I sat at my table and wrote this down because somewhere a girl in white sneakers is looking at a phone on a counter and thinking she is special because the story tells her she is. I want to tell her that special isn't a currency that spends. The only currency I've found that buys anything is boring. Paper, signatures, exits. This really happened. I'm 24. My husband transferred our savings to his lover, and I froze his accounts and vanished. And I did it without burning down the room because sometimes the cold is cleaner. The end.